Hey friends, welcome back to Bible Fun with the Duns. Today we read 1 Chronicles chapter 21. Let's get started.
Okay, so this is a story you can also find in 2 Samuel chapter number 24. A couple of things I think that help us to understand what's going on here, kind of put some flesh on the bones of this story. First of all, we got to remember who wrote the book of 1 Chronicles. It was Ezra. And Ezra wrote the stories, rewrote all of what you can basically see in 2 Samuel. He's rewriting it for the audience of the exiles who had come out of exile and they're living back in the land of Jerusalem. And what are they doing when they're in the land of Jerusalem? They're restoring their nation. They're rebuilding their temple. They're rebuilding the walls. They're rebuilding their society. Well, when did their society really start to grow? Well, they came into the promised land. Joshua was the leader. Then the judges. After the judges, Saul, the king, was there. But kind of when everything started really picking up steam was during the rule of David. And so now Ezra is writing all of these stories back out for these exiles, reminding them of the same themes that David was discovering as he kind of came along. Now, here's why this chapter is important. Because this is the story of how Israel got the land that they're rebuilding the temple on. So all of this story revolves around David sinning, and I'm going to talk about that in just a minute, like why this is a sin. But David sinning, God punishing, and then it ends with David going up on a mountain. By the way, this is the same mountain that Abraham almost sacrificed Isaac on at the very top. David goes to the very top of this mountain and he wants to buy the land. Yeah, we've been there. He wants to buy the land so that he can build the temple. The guy was like, hey, I'll just give it to you. And David says, no, I got to buy this because I can't give something to God that didn't cost me anything. I like what Tony Evans said about this. He said that sacrifice isn't sacrifice if it doesn't hurt. And service isn't service unless it costs. Wow. I like that. I thought it was a good way to put that. But this is the story of how Israel got this land. And this is where the temple is going to go. And so now you've got the sacrifice of Isaac taking place here. David is sacrificing to save the city. All of this is happening, and this is where the temple goes. And so Israel, these exiles, are remembering all this, kind of where it all comes from. Now, let's talk about where the sin is in this story. It's interesting because in this story, it says that Satan stirred up David, whereas if you went back to 2 Samuel, it says God was angry. Well, you gotta ask the question, well, who's mad? Is it God, like 2 Samuel says, or is it Satan, like this chapter says? And I just am thinking, I think the best answer here is that it's both.
Reminds me of Job.
It reminds me of Job. So, what if God is angry with David, and because God is angry with David, he allows the devil to come in and to attack? Much like in the story of Job, the Lord allowed the devil to do all that he did. The devil did it, but the Lord allowed it. So what if that's what's happening here? God is angry, and he allows David to be open and vulnerable to an attack. Now, I'm going to finish with that later, all right?
What I like about that is there's nothing that God is not in control of.
That's right.
And so even evil, he has to allow or not allow to happen, but he can use evil to work within his plan.
That's right. That's right. All right, so here's where the sin comes in. Why was it a sin for David to count the number of people he had?
I know all about this.
All right. This sin is about control. Okay. So David is a king who has been consistently victorious in battle. And now he's struggling with counting all the people. Why? Why does he care how many people are in the nation? Well, first of all, probably because, they got to pay taxes because he's got to fund an army, right? Number two, it's because he needs to know how many soldiers he has. Why? Because in David's mind as a general, he knows that in order to go to battle, you gotta have soldiers. But listen, He should have known, even as a kid, he was able to defeat a giant. Why? Because victory doesn't come in the things that other kings look for. Other kings needed the tools and the weapons and the soldiers, and they thought that made them strong. David should have known better, that it's not those things that make you strong, it's God that gives you victory. So his sin was trusting in his resources instead of trusting in the victory of God. That's why this is a sin. Now, what was your takeaway from this? Oh gosh. Okay. Well, just re-say it. I'm sure you'll say better.
Okay. Well, so I get it, because that's an area of my life that I have struggled with. And so you know that there may be a distance between you and God if you start, I guess, giving into your fear. If you start trying to control things, trying to manipulate things. And that's what we see David doing there. If he checks his boxes of, if all of this checks off, then I'm okay, I'm safe. He's not placing his trust in God. He's placing his trust in, his system. He's placing his trust maybe even in himself. And so that's really a form of idolatry. And if you're finding peace and you're finding solace and safety in anything other than God, number one, it's not trustworthy. That just because the boxes are checked doesn't mean that's going to come true. And just like you were saying, like in the case of David versus Goliath, that box was not checked. He was not bigger, he was not better equipped, but he had God, and so he was still able to defeat him. And then him being punished, I think it's interesting. This is fascinating that God's like, hey, you get 3 options. You're going to be punished. Like, wow, that's a big deal that you even get options. But I think David was super wise, and I think I would have chosen something that which God's in control of everything, but God having his hand on it, it made sense in his head. And so I get that. And I think we still continue to see God's character of love and wanting a relationship almost more than anything with us, to the point where in verse 15 it said, God sent the angel to Jerusalem to destroy it, but when the angel was about to destroy the city, the Lord looked, relented concerning the destruction, and said to the angel who was destroying the people, enough, withdraw your hand now. And I just think that's God. That's our God. That's his character. I trust him even in his punishment and discipline.
Yeah. I wrote a few things down in the margin of my Bible. I said that it's important to see here, basically, notice that when the devil is ready to attack, how does he attack the nation? He went after their leader. Well, if he wanted to attack your home, who do you think he would go after? Okay, so here's a number of questions I wrote down. And I wrote this under the subheading of, it just in the margin of my Bible, it just says temptation. Watch. Did David have an inner struggle with control, or a need or a pressure to keep on winning battles, and to be the mighty warrior general that the people expected him to be? Did he need to stay on top so that he had to lean on his own administration instead of on faith? And that was the way I saw this. I think you were right on with that. I also think if you're Ezra and you're writing the story so that people are trying to remember these things, it's showing that the only perfect leader that Israel has or will ever have is God himself. David, we can't romanticize David's life. He was a sinner, he was a murderer, he was an adulterer, and he was super unfaithful here. Well, who's the only one Israel can consistently count on? God. Why is that important for Ezra and his people? Well, remember when you read Ezra and all of their leaders were like marrying foreign wives and making poor decisions and afraid of the nations around them? So all of these leaders, that if the people are reading this and they're going, if our leaders aren't right, nothing's going to be right. No. God is your leader. And so that's kind of what I think Ezra is leaning into in this story. And it's a beautiful story, but it's a convicting story. If you like I am, like we are tempted with control, like I want to be able to control it so that I feel safe, then you know what it is to commit this sin. I just hope God doesn't punish us the way he was going to punish David. All right, let's keep reading and see what the Lord has for us tomorrow in chapter number 22. We'll see you then. Bye.